Hey everybody, welcome to another live AMA session here. I am Steve White, CEO of RentPrep. Um, for those of you joining us again from last time, thanks for coming back. Anybody new, we appreciate you having around, and obviously we appreciate having you in our community. I'm gonna, kind of like last time, get through as many questions as we can. I'm going to try to make it as less awkward as possible for me, and especially, I did 100 and something episodes of our podcast to having some sort of interaction. So sometimes it can be weird for me just being here all by myself. So I appreciate you guys hanging out and bearing with me. So we got our first question in here. And before I start too, I just want to say thank you to Ashley, our marketing coordinator, who always does a great job with pulling together live events like this, our newsletter. If you're not already subscribed to the newsletter, I would definitely recommend that. Always a lot of really useful information in there. And of course, thanks to our moderators in the community. You guys do an awesome job and really make the community what it is, and really what we initially intended was a safe space for landlords to be and interact, and that's exactly what we have, I feel like. So thank you sincerely to all the moderators that helped make that happen. Okay, so jumping right into the questions here, the first one we got, I happen to have a lot of knowledge on this. If you guys have any questions on collecting past due rent, obtaining judgments, collections in general, fire away with those. That is where the majority of my credit experience comes from, is the credit and collections industry. I worked as a consultant for years. That's kind of how we got into doing background checks, of sort of a natural evolution. But I'm definitely well versed in these questions, so I feel super comfortable answering these. So the first question I've got is from a landlord who says, I won a judgment against former tenants, and needless to say, I have not received any money from them. Not shocked, that's pretty typical. Am I allowed to share that judgment with the 3 credit bureaus in New York State? So, first things first, just to explain for anybody who doesn't know, the process of obtaining a judgment for a landlord is no different than any creditor would obtain a judgment, meaning, somebody owes you money. So whether it's a landlord doing it, or Capital One, a bank, Old Navy, credit card, whatever it is, when people stop paying, the typical course of action would be obtaining that judgment. The problem with judgments is that they're very difficult to execute. They're difficult to enforce and to actually get money out of those judgments eventually. So I'll share with you in a second a couple of ideas on some things you may be able to do. But to first answer the question, are they allowed to share that judgment with the 3 credit bureaus? The answer is no. In 2018, I believe it was, all 3 credit bureaus came to a unanimous decision that judgments and liens were no longer going to be included in credit reports. So credit bureaus will not report that judgment any longer. And this was a huge deal in our industry because literally overnight, I think this was July 2018, but literally overnight, 22 million people saw a huge bump in their credit scores because judgments and liens were taking off of those credit reports and no longer considered adverse information that could be used against the person on their credit report. Doesn't mean that it lessens the validity of the judgments themselves. They're still valid. They're still an acceptable way to prove that somebody owes you a debt. And they do serve a good function and a purpose for eventually tracking that money down if you can, but they're not touched anymore by the credit bureaus. And that's a whole different story as to why, but in every single state. So it doesn't matter just New York. It's the 3 credit bureaus as a whole now do not accept judgments and liens in there. And the only civil records that are reported are bankruptcies. So a couple of ideas here. Getting somebody to pay on a judgment is very difficult to do, especially now that it doesn't affect their credit. And the typical course of action would be freezing a bank account, garnishing wages, and those are effective, but usually pretty difficult to execute. So a bank account, for example, now in order to freeze a bank account, there needs to be a minimum dollar amount in that bank account. And I'm pretty sure for New York, it's $2,500. Now, if somebody owes you past due rent, there's not a very high chance that they've got $2,500 sitting in their bank account to freeze. And also, I just should point out that I'm pretty sure that $2,500 is untouchable, meaning if you had a $2,500 judgment and you wanted to collect that, they would have to have $5,000 in their bank account in order to freeze it, take the money, and execute it that way. Very difficult to do. Plus, you typically need to have their bank information, which if they wrote you checks, maybe you still have that and have that bank information. Garnishing wages is also difficult unless they have had a fairly long-term employment. But if they're job hoppers, that's going to be next to impossible. And there's a lot of restrictions that come along with garnishing wages as well, where you can only garnish a certain percentage of that person's wage. I'm pretty sure Ohio has the highest percentage, which is around 10%. That could have changed. It's been years since I've been in that world, and so I'm not 100% sure on that, but it used to be Ohio at 10%. So the one strategy that I would that I'll share that I have seen landlords have more success with than freezing accounts or garnishing wages is garnishing tax refunds. And the way to do this, and you got to be timely because there's filing deadlines that you have to meet, and they're typically in. So check with your local county, ask them, tell them you want to file a tax refund garnishment. They'll give you the paperwork and they'll tell you what the filing deadline is to be able to do that. And what will happen if you get that filed in time and they have a refund coming, then you are staking a claim to that refund before they receive it. And so the chances of you getting paid on that are much higher than trying to chase somebody down for wages and things like that. Now, obviously, if they don't have enough of a refund coming to cover the debt that they owe, you're going to be filing it, year over year until you can recover that debt. The one nice thing that I'll say, not nice for the tenant or the debtor, but nice for the landlord is there's an element of surprise there because the tenant or the person who owes you the money they're not notified ahead of time. So they don't know that it's coming until that refund gets issued and they see it's minus whatever that judgment amount was, and it'll have like a line item in there explaining. But that's useful because if you have somebody that's purposely trying to play the avoidance game, which most people are when it comes to paying judgments and debts, this is a good strategy to catch them off guard, catch them by surprise, hopefully grab the whole amount in one clean swoop if you can. And yeah, it may take you a couple of tries to get it all, and obviously you lose your element of surprise after that first one. But I have seen some landlords do this successfully. So again, the important thing to remember here is number one, there's filing deadlines. So it's going to be at the county court typically. So your local county court, wherever that judgment was filed, that's where you're going to want to go to see if you can obtain the paperwork for the tax refund garnishment. And then also keep in mind that judgments are good for 7 years, but they can be renewed. So, and I don't think the cost to renew them is very much. Usually just like a filing fee, $10, $20, something like that, whatever your county charges for filing fees, maybe a little bit more in Florida. So I personally think it's good to keep that stuff active. You never know. And eventually, if it turns into a situation where you're going after somebody's estate, if they pass, a lot of states allow for judgment liens where you can put a lien on that estate so they can't liquidate that estate until that judgment or lien is paid off. So it's never a bad idea to renew judgments after their 7 years. Just my advice to landlords is don't count on that money. Let go of the idea that you're going to get that money or it's going to be a for sure thing. Really, really low collection rates. And just to share some data again that might be somewhat outdated, but I doubt that it's changed very much. Typically in the collection industry, dental debt, so from dentists, has usually a pretty low collection rate. Low recovery rate. People go to different dentists. They leave a dentist owing money. There's no dentist blacklist that you're put on, and some other dentist won't see you because you're on that blacklist. So dental recovery rates are pretty low, and housing or rent-related recovery rates were always lower than even the dental rates. So we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of, I would say, 10 to 15%, 15 being obviously on the high end. So your chances of actually recovering that money, unfortunately, are pretty low. Shameless plug, but that's obviously why it's a really good reason to put the extra effort into the screening process to make sure that you're reducing that risk as much as possible. I get that sometimes it's going to happen, and somebody may not have a bad history or history of any kinds of judgments or liens or anything like that, and you're just the unlucky first. That for sure happens. But anything that you can do to walk into a situation that is potentially going to turn bad, or this person has done it before, you want to try to avoid those at all costs. And judgments, liens, any kind of action like that, including evictions, I'll tell you also, if a person has one, like evictions, for example, if they have an eviction, they are 3 times more likely to be evicted again. And that's because the fear of the unknown is gone. I think for a lot of people, the scariest thing, especially when it comes to evictions, but certainly judgments, is, oh my God, this is happening. What does this mean? What's going to happen? And then once they go through that process once, and a year or two passes, and they realize, like, oh, I'm okay, I survived it, I lived, that fear of the unknown is gone, and unfortunately it's more likely to happen again into the future. So it's why it's really important to do that work on the front end during the screening stage, for that they don't have any history of these things happening, and you're at least reducing that risk that it's going to happen. So I hope I answered that sufficiently enough. So the takeaway there is check out tax refund garnishments. Okay. Next question I've got here is, can a landlord claim a toy hauler travel trailer as an expense? It's used to haul lawnmowers and snow blowers to rental property for yard maintenance. So I'm picturing, when you say toy hauler, I'm picturing like up in Buffalo, people have snowmobiles and they put them in these enclosed trailers. So if that's what you're talking about by toy hauler, I don't think it matters that it's a toy hauler or enclosed trailer or anything like that. I think it probably follows the typical rules for a business. And I would even assume that this is this is something that you can even depreciate. You may have to slap a logo on it. I know that for some commercial insurance, sometimes that they require that it's, you know, either registered commercial or it has signage or logos on it, or it's clearly indicated that this is a commercial vehicle, commercial, you know, trailer. But I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to claim that as an expense, and again, depreciate it as well. Obviously, check with your accountant, but I don't see any issues with that whatsoever. Kind of reminds me of a couple of years ago. There was this weird loop. Man, this is probably 10 years ago. I think it's going back. There was a weird loophole in the law that considered Hummers, if you remember those big giant, you know, trucks, clearly road vehicles, though not farm equipment. But for some reason, Hummers were classified as farm equipment, and businesses were scooping these things up left and right and getting all kinds of tax credits and all sorts of stuff on them. And I knew a guy in the property management world who bought 2 of them, and was taking full advantage of that tax credit while it was available until they closed that loophole up. But so in my opinion, I would think if, you know, if they're going to accept that, I would for sure think that something that you're using to operate and maintain your business certainly can be used as a claimed as a tax expense, and again, depreciated as well. Okay, on to the next question. So this question says, how do you respond when applicants or current tenants tell you that they have or need an emotional support animal? So the first thing to remember is, and probably the most important thing to remember, is that you're dealing with a protected class. If this is you cannot come out and ask them what their disability is. That's the most important thing to remember. You cannot say, why do you need this? And you can't load the question either and say, well, is it for anxiety, PTSD? What's the reason? You can verify the authenticity with a medical note that you're well within your right to verify it. You just cannot ask them specific questions about their disability. You can ask them about the animal, what's the, you know, what kind of animal it is, and I wouldn't ask it from the point of view of, like, you know, this is the list of items, you know, of animals that are not acceptable, and here's the list that is. I would leave that out and just the facts. You know, what kind of animal is it, and gather that information, and then you can certainly ask for medical proof, certificate. You can call the doctor that issued it. You can go that far. You can even speak with the doctor, the nurse, and say, you know, I'm just verifying the validity, the authenticity of this. Really, all you're looking for is for them to say, yes, I signed that. That's real. They're not going to divulge, obviously, medical information and say, yeah, it's real, and here's a list of the issues that they're having, why they need it. But usually usually it is listed as to why the emotional support animal is needed. So, and obviously the potential issue that you have there is there's a lot of sites online that are offering, you know, easy to get certificates for 50 or 100 bucks, signed off by a medical review officer. And so I will say that you're not the first landlord to run into this issue. You certainly won't be the last until at a federal level they look at this real serious. But this is an ongoing issue that landlords are dealing with, you know, and I've heard some real crazy stories, you know, lizards, peacocks, all kinds of stuff. So I would just keep that in the back of your mind, that you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're infringing on somebody's rights. So you don't want to ask them what their disability is. You don't want to make them qualify with certain disabilities. So I would take it one step at a time. Say, okay, what type of animal is it, and can you provide medical documentation? And then you do your work to follow up with it. That being said, there are some, and I've definitely heard some conflicting opinions on this, but there are some, very few, but some legitimate reasons to not accept somebody potentially, and that would be if there's a breed restriction on your insurance. So you want to check your landlord policy to see if you have on the insurance policy, and that may get you out of being forced to allow them, because you can make a claim that would cause an undue hardship on you, that you would lose your insurance because they had a pit bull or a Rottweiler or any of the other breeds that are typically listed as dangerous breeds, or not exempt, but breeds that they won't allow on the policy. So that might be another one there for you to double check that. And then the last thing is double check with your municipality to see how far Mrs. Murphy laws cover you. And so Mrs. Murphy law, and again, depending on what type of landlord you are, this may or may not apply to you, but Mrs. Murphy laws are really meant to protect owner occupants on rentals. So if you're renting an upstairs and you live downstairs, believe it or not, you do not have to follow a lot of federal guidelines when it comes to a lot of rules surrounding how you deny people, how you treat people in terms of accepting them or not. So double check your local municipality, check your Mrs. Murphy law, see if you fit within that, see if there's any exemptions there that you might fall under. But unfortunately, the ugly truth is this is a problem for landlords, these emotional support animals. And you see it on the news every once in a while. Somebody boards a plane with a peacock or something crazy. So until they figure it out, it's going to continue to be a problem. But I see it more and more too. It's very strange for me to, I'll be shopping or in the mall or something, and you see somebody walking around with a dog, and it's crazy to me. You just obviously, I didn't grow up seeing, kind of weird to get used to, but obviously, some work needs to be done there, and to help fix some things and close some loopholes. But that's a problem that a lot of landlords run into, and there's certainly enough people out there that are taking full advantage of the system, and no pets allowed just doesn't seem to apply to them anymore, unfortunately. Okay, I got a question in here from the chat. I'm gonna address this one real quick. It just caught my eye. This is from Lisa. Can unpaid rent be turned over to a collector, and then could it go on a credit report? The answer there is yes. And thank you, Lisa, because I didn't even touch on that when I answered my first question. But I think that's a really legitimate strategy. The one thing that I'll point out and say that it's important to keep in mind, don't pay a penny to have a collection agency take this debt and service it. You're going to want to, and a lot of them do anyway, but you're going to want to find one that works on a contingency basis. So they're only going to get paid if they collect some of the money. This is obviously a good strategy because there's no, additional risk or liability on your part. You don't have to put money up front to get them to go after it. And they've got a little skin in the game. They got a reason to want to collect on it. And they can go through the judgment process so that you don't have to. With the recovery rate being so low on past due rent anyway, I really see this as being a realistic and affordable solution to getting some of your money recovered And at the very least, I know this is the wrong thing to say, and I'm not condoning like harassment or anything, but I know for a lot of landlords, principal is an issue, and especially if somebody really, did you dirty or did you wrong or wrecked the place on the way out just as an extra, twist of the knife. Nobody wants to have a collection agency bugging them. So, I've said before, principal can get really expensive, and this is an inexpensive principal-based move, turning that person over to a collection agency for them to go after them, and then obviously they've got to deal with that information, or deal with that process of going through a collection agency. Piece of advice that I have there is, if you're not already doing so, make sure you are documenting everything really, really well, right? So missed rent, late fees, those type of things, damages, obviously, those are all going to be necessary in court anyway, and certainly for a judgment. Make sure you have a signed copy of the agreement, the lease. And then this is another one. This is a really important piece here that I would say is future proofing yourself, is if you don't already do it, start adopting a no blank space policy on your rental application. So that rental application is going to serve so many purposes and have a life well beyond the initial screening process. So obviously you may use that rental application to give a screening company like RentPrep, information about their date of birth, social security number. Obviously, you're going to have them list previous or current landlords, make sure they're giving you phone numbers. If they leave something blank and say, I don't have it, or I don't know, I would kindly push it back and say, it's got to be completed. You got to find that number. There's a lot of little pieces that a lot of people skip and think are not important. Like, for example, references and next of kin. Obviously, we feel as a screening company, it is a complete waste of time to call someone's mother and ask them if they're a good tenant or not. I would imagine more often than not, people, the mother's going to say, yeah, they're great, they're awesome. They either want them out of the house or want to see them get an apartment or want to help them out. So that information is not useful during the screening process. However, that information becomes super useful to a collection agency who can't get in touch with your tenant, and now they have information on the mother, which can help them skip trace and locate somebody, especially if they're moving around or maybe they moved back home. Now you've got additional phone numbers, contact information. So again, no blank space policy on the rental applications, because there's so much useful information that can be used beyond the screening process for a collection situation. So thank you, Lisa. That is it was a perfectly timed question too. I feel like that is absolutely something to consider. Check out your local collection agencies. If you don't have anything, local, like in your municipality, at least check your state. Collection agencies do operate state by state and have to get licensing in different states. So not every agency has multi-state or 50-state licenses. So save yourself some time and try to find something local first, something within your state. And then the very next thing you want to verify or make sure is that this is contingency based and nothing is going to come out of your pocket in order for them to collect on it. If they do want you to pay something, don't do it. A lot of them will also charge you for letter service, meaning, we'll send a letter on your behalf from a third-party collection agency, and you got to pay up front for that, and it's $100 or something like that. Tell them I want to skip that. It's just not useful. You want to go straight to contingency-based collections. So, hope that answers your question, Lisa. Thank you for sending that in. Okay. Got a question here from Jesse. What do you do if a tenant is mentally harassing you with manipulation, lies, making violation reports to housing codes when you are actively making repairs? The best thing you can do, Jesse, is, again, going back to some previous advice that I had a minute ago, make sure you are documenting everything. Every call, every interaction that you have, especially when it gets to this point where you know that you're going to have to potentially defend yourself or defend your actions or what you've done. Take good pictures, especially if they're time stamped. I think we have an article on our website too that shows you how to put a timestamp on smartphone pictures and images. In court, I've seen a lot of landlords lose because they don't have timestamped photos. A lot of courts, you know, that's a requirement that they want to see. It's not a bad idea either to connect with your local enforcement, whoever's enforcing these, you know, or dealing with these violation reports or housing codes, if it's the municipality or whoever. Again, not a bad idea to reach out to them, say, hey, I'm dealing with this issue. I think it goes a long way in showing that you know, you're being forthcoming, you're trying to do the right thing. I know locally we've seen some issues with a tenant advocacy group up here in Western New York called HOME. It's HOME, and it stands for Housing Opportunities Made Equal, and they can be a real nightmare for landlords. But they do like landlord training and stuff like that, and I always encourage landlords to take part in that. Get your name known. Let them know that you're not one of the bad apples. The problem in this industry that I've seen since I started it in 2007, started working in the rental and housing industry, is that there are enough landlords out there to give landlords a bad name, and unfortunately, a couple bad apples will ruin the bunch. And if you're a landlord who is trying to do the right thing, you've got to make sure that that's known, and you got to put your best foot forward and let everyone know, hey, I realize that, you know, there's some people out there doing things that are questionable, but I'm not one of them. I'm following the rules. I'm doing things the way that I'm supposed to. I think that does go a long way, especially with, you know, tenant advocacy groups, sometimes even housing authorities. Depends on where you live and who's really enforcing those violations or codes, who you might be dealing with. But I would reach out to them and try and make sure that, you know, there's another side to the story, and you may already be doing that. And if so, I would say in these type of cases, especially when it comes to housing violations, be prepared to lawyer up. Don't be afraid to lawyer up. Find an attorney, if you don't already have one, that specializes in housing. This is, you know, there's usually in every area a handful of attorneys that this is exactly what they specialize in, whether it be evictions or you know, housing violations, HUD violations, things like that. You want to find somebody that this is exactly what they do. Okay, hope that was good enough there, Jesse. Good luck with that. I know that's no fun, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And those people are exhausting and draining, and you know, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I hope that you make it out okay on that situation. Okay, next question here. Question from Susan. Am I legally able to claim my personal address, that my personal address is my 6-unit apartment building? I was told I can because they're listed A through F versus 1 through 6. That seems far-fetched to me, especially since all 6 are on different power meters. I guess my question would be, why would you want to claim that your personal address is your 6-unit apartment building? I'm trying to think why you would want to do that. I honestly, nothing's jumping out at me as to why you'd want to. But assuming that there's a legitimate reason, the only experience that I have with this is a lot of people who have New York businesses, which we are, try to operate out of Florida because the taxes are much better and the weather is much better in Florida. And I've known a couple of people personally to run into issues where they're trying to use an address claiming that it's personal or business, and it ends up not being the case. And a lot of times is looking for those types of things. Oh, Susan just updated it. Okay, so she does live in the building. I would think, yeah, I would think for sure you're able to legally claim your personal address as your apartment building. The only exception, so I will say this, and I'm not 100% sure, Susan, check with your local municipality. This is something you can usually call like your, local town hall, something like that, to ask specifically about the Mrs. Murphy exemptions. For some reason, I think that in New York, it's standing out to me that there is a 4-unit limitation. So you may be outside of that if you have a 6-unit building. So that may be the case. So I would definitely double check with your municipality. If that's the case, that means you gotta follow the rules and play by the rules. I would not recommend trying to slide something in under the radar because, again, there's certain situations where it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. Dealing with housing codes and housing authorities or any of the alphabet agencies that protect people's rights, whether it be the ADA, the FCRA, EEOC. You do not want to be in a situation where you have to ask for forgiveness in dealing with them. It'll cost you. So I would say, err on the side of following the letter to the letter of the law, and I wouldn't try to get away with anything in those types of situations. Again, to me, it's just not worth. It's not worth getting caught if that ends up happening or something goes wrong. Okay. Next question from Shub. Do the same animal support laws apply if I'm renting without a real estate agent? Yes, for sure. So the laws that protect the emotional support animals or service animals, you're dealing with the ADA. This is the American Disabilities Act. So it doesn't matter if you have a real estate agent. It doesn't matter if you're doing it on your own. Their rights have to be protected. And if you're in the business of renting properties, you assume that responsibility that you're going to protect their rights or at the very least not infringe on their rights. So I would say, yeah, it doesn't matter if you're renting without a real estate agent, you're still going to want to follow the letter of the law as best you can. The one thing I would also mention about this, I don't know if I said this on the emotional support animals, but for landlords, it's a good idea to try to eliminate using the term pets and replace it with animals. Start using the word animals versus pets. I know that a lot of tenants, and I've even seen like the tenant advocacy groups try to, create some booby traps for landlords, trying to get them to say certain things, maybe even in their listing ads that say, they can't have, no animals, no exceptions, anything like that. So I would say the only place that you should be saying pets is probably the listing ad, where you might say no pets allowed or please no pets, something like that. But everywhere else you want to start using just pets, so they're not Because again, somebody's going to claim, well, this is not a pet that we're talking about. This is an emotional support animal. So again, even on your applications or pre-screening, do you have any animals, not pets? Okay. Hope that answers your question, Shub. Another question here. I own a single family rental. I've been filing Schedule S. This year, I see myself investing in more single family and passively in multifamily. Should I consider filing Schedule C? Man, this question is so outside of my wheelhouse that I'm going to say I have a few thoughts on it. I'm hesitant to share. I'm not an accountant. I can tell you that I file Schedule S. You know, I don't know if it depends on your state, if it matters necessarily. I imagine that it probably does. But I think that so many other factors play into it that I would say it's definitely a question for your accountant. In terms of, you know, outside of tax strategy, let's just talk about protection. You know, I know that there's a couple of different mindsets when it comes to how to structure your rentals. Me personally, I am of the mindset of, and so, you know, I separate things as much as possible. You know, we just built out a new building. Obviously, I have a holding company that owns the property. You know, that's separate and outside from RentPrep. I certainly don't want someone slipping and falling on the sidewalk, and now I got to worry that that's going to affect our screening business. And with my rental properties, it's no different. You know, I don't want, you know, a domino effect where something happens in a rental property and there's a path for somebody to come after me, either for my own personal property or other entities, you know, like RentPrep. So I make sure that I work with my attorney and my accountant pretty closely, you know, for a good strategy on how to create moats around each of these businesses so that somebody cannot reach across and grab from another entity. So that would be my advice, is that's how you want to structure it. Can't guarantee it's always going to be best for you tax-wise or financially, although I can't see any real strong downsides to it, at least the way that I'm doing it. But again, that is a for sure question for your accountant. The only advice I'd give you there is make sure your accountant, make sure you got a good accountant, not a tax preparer. There's a difference. If you haven't realized it already, there's a big difference between somebody who just prepares your taxes and an actual accountant. I had to learn that the hard way many years ago. So make sure you're seeing an accountant who understands tax laws. And again, you know, it's not a bad idea to work with your attorney, who's going to need to, or who's going to be the one helping you create these and organize these different entities. So again, to me, it's important to get it right. I know that a lot of landlords are do-it-yourselfers, and there's some things where I think it's absolutely okay to do it yourself. You know, if I'm changing a lockout, sure, I'm going to do it myself. If I'm, you know, even as far as, you know, resealing a driveway or something like that, yeah, I'll do it myself. When it comes to certain things like evictions, taxes, structuring entities, you know, dealing with an unreasonable tenant who's harassing you or filing violations against you, those are usually not things you want to do yourself. So, you know, I would for sure say don't be afraid to spend a little money, get the attorney, make sure you get the, you know, for tax purposes, the accountant. It's going to be well worth your investment. Man, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I'd much rather pay that up front and make sure that things were organized correctly than, God forbid, something terrible happens and now I'm fighting to make sure that my own house is protected or my other businesses or something like that. So, to me, it's well worth paying that up front and making sure that it's done right. Hope that answers your question. So call your accountant on that right away. Okay. Next question. When someone's lease is up, do you show their unit the last 30 days or wait until it's vacant and clean? I've shown units in the past with tenants in them, but they never showed well. So I've been waiting until they're vacant and clean them out, but then my vacancy rate is much higher than I like. Tip, I got a great tip for you. You gotta get in the mindset of a tenant, right? What motivates them? And I'm sure most of you have dealt with this. Usually when, you've got to get into a property at the very least, or at the very best, I should say, a tenant is going to be compliant, willing to work with you. At the worst, they're going to be not compliant, not willing to work with you, make you constantly pick new dates for showing times, things like that. But what I will say is I don't know that I've ever had an experience where a tenant was super excited to do the showing, right? So I say this for a reason. I think that in these cases, a little bit of motivation goes a long way. So the first thing I would say is, like always, really good communication is key. You want to let your tenant know, hey, I'd like to start showing the place, and I know that it may, be an inconvenience for you for me to call you and say, hey, I got to have this person show up. Obviously, you want to say, hey, can you make sure that it's as tidy as possible? Those types of things. Work out times with them that'll work for them. Usually, you want to try to have a couple of blocks that are usually available. So I would ask them what typically is really, a good time for you. Saturday's okay. What about Sundays? And then I would for sure make it really clear that that there's some incentive. There's a carrot at the end of the stick for them, and say, it's really helping me out. If you can do this, if you can, be available and help me and make sure that the house is super clean, really well, I'll give you a gift card for $50 for Amazon or $100 at a restaurant, local restaurant or something like that. In my opinion, it is worth a few bucks to, it's an insurance policy. It's worth a little bit to give them some incentive so that they're, again, putting their best foot forward and they have a little motivation to do so. So in my experience, in my opinion, anytime that you can dangle a carrot like that, it's going to at least go better than not, because I don't know anybody that's super excited about having strangers walk through their apartment. It's an inconvenience pretty much no matter, how you look at it. So again, try to get them on board, make them understand that you really appreciate it. It's helpful. You want to get the place turned over quick. Again, in my mind, that's a very, very low cost insurance policy. And I've even seen landlords go as far as saying, hey, if you kind of like a cash for keys type of thing, but assuming that you're not dealing with people who are past due. But, hey, if you leave this place spotless and help me out with that, I'll throw in an extra this or gift card for there or whatever. But those to me are always low cost insurance policies that are well worth it in the long run. Okay. Question from Susan. I had a squatter. Sorry, Susan. I feel bad for you already. I had a squatter for a year who, according to his parents, abandoned his unit 2 months ago. I moved his property to his parents' house, but how do I know he won't come back and claim that he did not move out? Well, I would say, again, documentation is key here, right? If you're ever put in a situation where he goes to the police or maybe to the court system and starts saying, hey, I never moved out, this didn't happen or whatever, it certainly doesn't hurt to have really good timeline documentation on what happened. Here's a picture of everything that was moved. Here's a picture of us dropping it off at the parent's house or whatever the case is. Just having that documentation so that it's a lot less of your word versus theirs, and it's, you know, they can clearly see that you're pretty organized and you've been keeping good track of everything, and this isn't something that you just fell into and walked in on. You knew that this was an issue and you've been addressing it as an issue for, you know, since the beginning. So I would treat it as abandonment. You know, he abandoned the property. You moved his property. If you moved it to his parents' house, I have to assume, obviously you had connections to his parents, or maybe his parents requested that. I know that in some states, most states, you're required to move it to storage. But again, if you're getting specific directions that it should go here, I don't think that you did anything wrong necessarily. But again, good documentation is going to protect you there. Obviously, change the locks. It's, you know, it's an abandonment. It's not going to be considered a lockout if you've terminated a lease and moved all of his stuff. And especially if you got somebody else moving in there, the last thing you want, obviously, is for him to show up in the middle of the night one night. So I would just make sure that the keys are, you know, everything's rekeyed, everything's changed over, and move on. If he does come back, then it's trespassing, and I would deal with it accordingly. Okay. Next question. Holdover lease provisions. Do you use them? How do they hold up an eviction if an eviction occurs? So holdover lease provision is basically the lease term expires and the person is still leasing there. Typically, most leases are written in a way that after that initial term, if a new agreement is not entered into, it's going to roll over in a month to month, unless somebody terminates the agreement. Depending on your state, again, as the landlord, you have the ability to terminate that agreement if you want. Give them 60 days notice, 30 days notice, wherever you're at, depending, and just let them know, hey, you know, I'm terminating the lease agreement after this date, and you got to move out. If they are, so your next question is, how does it hold up if an eviction occurs? So again, I think it's really gonna be dependent on how your lease agreement is written. And most lease agreements that I've ever seen have language in there that speaks very specifically and directly about what happens at the end of the lease term. So if yours has language in there that explains that you know, this will roll over to a month to month, you know, then the eviction would still hold up. You know, they're still bound by that original agreement. It rolled over to a month to month. They don't have to sign a new one, but you can certainly make them sign a new one too. So I would say, without having more information, because I'm trying to understand if there was a reason for the holdover, or if that was a specific strategy that you know, maybe you didn't have another tenant lined up, or they weren't bad tenants, so you just thought it was well worth keeping them around or let them stay. I'm not sure, but I would say as long as your lease agreement is intact and good and obviously executed by both parties, you should be good to go, especially in the event that that somebody files an eviction or something, or if you have to file an eviction against somebody. All right. Let me see here. We got our first 70-degree day here in Buffalo. I do not have the air conditioning on, and I have my doors paying the price right now. All right. Okay. Oh, sorry. I see Jesse's updated comment in here saying it's been a nightmare. I'm sorry to hear that, Jesse. Worst nightmare is to know that you're dealing with just a real bad situation. Okay. Shub asked just an updated question here. Recommend any tax accountant? He's in Texas. I sure can't, other than again, at least here in New York, there's a big difference between a tax preparer and an accountant, a certified public accountant, CPA. In my opinion, and from my experience, I got hit with a 6-figure tax bill, and it was a very expensive way to learn the difference between a tax preparer and a CPA. So tax preparers are usually, good at following a process for filing taxes. They're not always a wealth of knowledge when it comes to how to structure and organize and, what might be a better strategy or what might be a better way to do something. So my accountant to you, Shub, is look for a CPA. Take the word tax right out of your search when you're looking for somebody local. I wouldn't go down that. I wouldn't. They need good advice on filed this is what it means, or this is what happens, but they're the right people always to advise you on what's in your best interest, considering everything that you've got going on. And everybody is so different. It requires a professional to really look into what you have going on and how everything is structured to find a good strategy for you. The one recommendation I'll give you, oh man, what's his name? Mark Kohler. He's not in Texas, and we've had him on our podcast, and we've got some of his content on our site, and I think his name is Kholer, and if it's not, it's Kohler. But Mark Kohler, he's an attorney and an accountant, and he's got a ton of content specifically for landlords, multifamily industry, and he actually is the one that I consulted with that helped me structure my different entities. And so what he did, what was kind of nice, was he basically drew up the game plan and said, this is exactly what you should do. I took that to my accountant, and my accountant basically, took a couple of days to look it over and got back to me and said, yeah, this makes sense. This looks awesome. So that's not a bad idea. And I want to say it cost me, for Mark Kohler, he's usually only a couple $100 to consult with, and he really, on his team, I may have gotten him because we had him on the podcast and stuff, so I'm not promising that you'll get Mark Kohler directly, but his team is perfectly capable as well. Again, this is what they do, but they do take the time to consider everything. I mean, the questions that he fired off at me, and he was even, I remember him even like drawing it on a whiteboard so that we didn't miss anything. And he had all different entities, you know, connecting, and here's how you do this, and here's how you structure that. So Mark Kohler, attorney and accountant. I would look him up, and at the very least, he's going to have some really good content on, you know, on some tax strategies for landlords. Okay. Got another question here. I do not want to continue renting a house to the tenants. The lease was over in February. It was a 1-year lease. In California, do I have to give them 30 or 60 days notice that I won't be renewing the lease and that they will have to vacate? So the only reason I'm not super confident at firing an answer off at this right away, COVID has obviously changed things, and it certainly did in New York, and I know California is usually right there alongside of New York when it comes to changing these type of things on the fly. And so I would say I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to look that up, whether it's 30 or 60 days notice. However, I will say you should be able to enforce that. I was just talking to somebody today specifically about, you know, the eviction moratorium and how that affects people. And I know that it's been brought up in court a number of times that you've got some tenant advocates who are concerned that landlords are using a loophole, which it's clearly not a loophole, but they see it as, okay, well, the loophole is they're not going to evict these people, but they're not going to renew the lease, and then they're going to give them notice that they've got to vacate. And so a lot of them are trying to make the claim that this goes against what the eviction moratorium was intended for. So I would say for sure you want to proceed with caution, as always with things like this. I would say, again, these are different times, so I'm going to give you a different answer than I would have a year ago. I think it's even worth communicating, having a conversation with them and explaining what your intentions are. I'm trying to think if there's a downside to that necessarily, but I don't think so. I don't think you're losing anything by, you know, like an element of surprise that they're going to get this notice. I would probably reach out to them and say, hey, your lease was over in February. You know, I've been rolling it over month to month, but I'm going to give you 60 days notice that I'm not going to be renewing that lease. And so that, you know, should give you enough time to find a new place. And the purpose of the conversation would kind of be to gauge where their head is at with it. If they're going to be a nightmare for you and, you know, start telling you you can't do that, and, you know, you're going to displace us, and, you know, there's a pandemic going on, or any of these things, then you know how to change your game plan there, and how you're going to need to address that situation, versus them saying, okay, that makes sense, you know, and then just being reasonable and compliant with you, versus digging their heels in and saying, you know, you're going to have to force me out of here. I feel like I would want to know that ahead of time, and I think that would change how I approach this, and whether or not I got an attorney involved, and what I wanted, you know, the length that I wanted to go to invest into making sure that this goes smoothly. If they really give you the warm and fuzzy that everything is good, and they're fine with it, and they're ready to move on, and, you know, we get it, we understand, or, you know, we're okay with it, you know, that doesn't mean skip any steps. Obviously, I'd still issue proper notice. I would look up California Apartment Association. They are always really up to date. Their website's always really up to date with the ever-changing California laws, and even through COVID. And I would double check if it's 30 or 60 days. New York is switched over to I think it's even 90 days now through COVID. So again, a year ago I would have answered this a lot more confidently. California, COVID, I'm not super confident to give you an answer and be willing to say go out there. I'd say just do a little groundwork and make sure that you're looking at up-to-date information that's considering COVID, it's considering the eviction moratorium, and then again, I would reach out to the tenants and just try some gentle communication. This is what I'm intending to do, and you know, I'm going to give you proper notice, and whether that's 36 or 90 days, I wouldn't be shocked if it's 90 days, and take the temperature from there, kind of gauge it from there, and see if it's you know, see how the situation is going to go, basically. I wouldn't want to walk into that with there being too much unknown, because they could make things really difficult for you. And again, landlords are, you know, landlords are taking the brunt of this for sure. And you know, there's a lot of claims being made that you know, that landlords are displacing people and not doing the right thing. And again, we already know that we've got, you know, we've got some baggage. We've got a history of people doing some unscrupulous things that, you know, a couple of bad apples will ruin the bunch. So in my mind, it's that much more important to show that you're doing things the right way. You're not somebody that's doing it the wrong way. And even in cases where, you know, you're dealing with advocates or different, you know, enforcement agencies, housing authorities, whoever it is, they know who their targets are and who they're going after, and it's usually the landlords that make their own trouble, that do things. Sometimes it's stubbornly. I would say the majority of the times it's stubbornly and not always ignorant. So if you know, those are the people that they're typically going to target. So just make sure that you're doing everything the correct way, and checking with the appropriate you know, agencies, or you know, your municipality or whatever, to make sure that everything is going the way that it should, and you're not going to do anything that's going to land you in some trouble. So, and again, I would issue that as a warning and a caution to every landlord, you know, in these times. You know, again, I'm reading articles every single day. I just gave an interview for a newspaper in Albany today, that's doing a story. You know, this is a really, really hot topic, and it, you know, we're even catching it in our industry with background checks. And the one thing I've learned over the years is I never want to be the hot topic. I want to, you know, I don't want to be the thing that everybody's looking out for, or somebody's scapegoat, or somebody's example, or, you know, a pariah. I don't want to be, you know, somebody's reason to make an example out of our industry, or landlords in general. So in my mind, it's for sure worth an extra look. It's for sure worth with an attorney on something that maybe you wouldn't have a year ago. You know, in my mind, those are all things that, especially during these times, are a low price to pay for, you know, avoiding a very expensive potential mistake in the future. So, okay. I think that's it. I think we got through most of the questions. If we didn't, I apologize. Feel free to post a comment. I'm sure the moderators will get it to me. If it's something that you want answered or a follow-up or anything like that, you can always email me to steve@rentprep.com. And again, I appreciate everybody being here today and for the support, and especially to Ashley, the moderators, for making sure that this stuff goes smoothly and for organizing it. I feel like it's hopefully helpful, and at the very least, we know that you know it's getting some help out there, and landlords are finding it useful. So we'll keep doing it as long as you guys keep finding it useful, and we'll continue to explore maybe having other people on, or if there's somebody that you guys would want to see, let us know, and we'll see if we can wrangle them up for you and put them on the hot seat, literally. I feel like it's 100 degrees in my office right now. Okay, thank you everybody, and we'll see you next time.